We are here today on Country Pocket with Paula Boggs. She is the front woman, as you might guess, of the Paula Boggs Band, and her new album is Janus. Um, she is a veteran, a former corporate lawyer and vice president, assistant U.S. attorney, and advisor of sorts to the Obama administration. Uh, in addition to touring with an Americana band, she works with nonprofits. Paula, I'm pretty sure you are the most accomplished person I've ever had on this show because most people's resumes here begin and end with music.
Well, mine sort of does too, Trevor. So in that way, I'm right in the pocket.
Right in the country pocket. There you go. The first song we heard, you teamed up with Dom Flemons, a true Americana hero, to produce the song King Brewster. That is a true story of an ancestor of yours. So, how did learning about that ancestry make you feel, and how were you able to learn about it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm happy to share it. I didn't know about King Brewster until the pandemic struck, and it was one of those things where my sister was contacted by an Alabama lawyer and basically said, "Are you a descendant of Nathaniel Boggs, my dad?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm one of four children," and that led to learning about this man, King Brewster, whose whose property was lost during Jim Crow. And I guess in Alabama there is some movement towards reparations for those people whose lands were stolen during Jim Crow, and so we are one of hundreds, I think, of descendants of King Brewster. This guy was married four times, and so he had a ton of kids. He had a ton of wives. He had a ton of kids, and we're several generations removed. So that's how I learned about King Brewster. In in large measure, I was learning about this and thinking about him when George Floyd was murdered in 2020. And really, Trevor, I couldn't escape the direct line between King Brewster's story and what was unfolding, in our country. And so those um, those impulses, those emotions drove me to a delve deeper into the story of King Brewster. And with my sister's help, I was able to learn a lot about him in a relatively short period of time. And then with that information, create, uh, you know, lyrics, and then a melody that ultimately became what you've been listening to.
So, when you found out what happened to him during his life, even his birth, how did that hit you? What did you feel?
I think I was hit by a number of emotions. Um, the thought that you know King was the son of the slave owner. He was his flesh and blood, and yet there was this system from which his dad benefited, and that uh, you know a um, you know a number of people were benefiting from, that led that to be more important than your fresh flesh and blood. And that that notion was, it was upsetting to me, but it was also revelatory because it really was an incredibly personal example of how um, embedded slavery was into the fabric of this nation, and how its vestiges, still haunt us. And so, with that, with those themes, I tried to write a song that was real. I didn't want to sugarcoat the story in any way, but I also, because I'm a songwriter, it needed to be poetic. It needed to be something that hopefully people could receive. And like a lot of my music, Trevor, I wanted it to end with a sense of hope. And so, the last lyrics of that song are, you know, we can't repave the past. May the future be recast. Those are the last lyrics of the second verse, and so I was wrestling with all of that.
I appreciate the hope you have. At the moment, I'm not so sure I share it. Um, what really hit me listening to this song is you have this story of a man going through horrible times because of the way systemic racism worked, and then flourishing during this period of Reconstruction.
Hmm.
And it sort of put a few things together in my head like, wait a minute. The second period of Reconstruction started, 100 years later with Martin Luther King Jr.
Hmm.
And I'm feeling like between the Supreme Court and some southern states, we're looking at that second period of Reconstruction coming to an end right now.
Well, I think that is one way to look at it, but I prefer to look at it a different way, a more hopeful way, in the context of the United States story. And, it's sort of like this. So, a lot of people I've learned really can't accept the truth of this, but the truth of the matter is, you know, the the United States was formed with slavery at the center of it, and the United States would not be the United States at its inception without slavery, because the southern states weren't going to join a union that didn't allow them to continue to have slaves. And our founding fathers, they're flawed, of course, but they they hoped, I mean, basically what they were doing was kicking the can down the road to future generations to figure out. And they were almost right, because you have the Lincoln era and you have the war and whatnot, and there's a brief period of time when sort of the wisdom of the founding fathers is playing out. The enslaved are free, their voting rights. King Brewster actually registered to vote in 1867, so right after the Civil War, right? And more blacks are becoming property owners and voting, and all of this stuff that the founding fathers had kind of hoped for, uh, that would happen generations later. But that period only lasted for a short period of time, because in part, a number of things happened that, sort of in the history of, of human, of humans had never happened before. We let the losers win, right? And and then and by winning, the losers created a new slavery, branded Jim Crow, but essentially it was another form of slavery. And so the hopeful thing in all of that for me is the mechanics of getting it right are embedded in America, but it takes will, right? And so, yeah, we're sort of at a crossroads right now, too. And, we can exercise that will to move forward, or like Jim Crow, we can uh, not move forward. And it's kind of up to us, right? The difference is, hopefully, I actually think um, there's more harmony in the United States than, you know, the press gives voice to. I think there is a vocal, um, outsized minority in this country with outsized power. But I think most people in this country are actually, broadly speaking, on the same page in a number of ways. And so part of the work, I guess, is to try to right size that better than we've been able to do, so far in 2022.
It's uh, it's a very very difficult time, but I do agree that the extremes have been highlighted and that there is, you know, a backlash
Mm-hmm.
to going more extreme that I think we're going to see more and more people able to stand up. The more demented it gets, the more, I guess, the more clear you can be in your rejection of all that. So it's terrifying to see, such an outright hateful group of people fighting for power, but it's also clarity there. There's also
Yeah,
no question on what's going on, and people are going to have to do the right thing, but they're certainly not going to be given too much confusion about what's going on.
I think that's right. I agree with that.
All right. So whenever I have someone on my show, I ask them to pick a song, not one of theirs, someone else, and I give them a little category. This is going to be, I think, the first visual category I've come up with. You have a huge bookshelf, a lot of music type books involved. So why don't you turn around, look at that shelf, and come up with a song based on one of those books on the shelf.
I think I can do that for you. I will highlight Joni Mitchell's Blue. And Joni Mitchell is covered in both. There's a book up here called Girls Like Us, and there's another one called Rock and Roll Woman. And I believe Joni Mitchell is in both of those books. And she's probably in other books on that bookshelf, but she's definitely in those. And I will name Joni Mitchell's Blue, the song. I mean, certainly the album is one that continues to resonate for me. But the song, I can remember when I first heard it. I mean, the album had been out. It was not the first Joni Mitchell album I'd heard. There were newer albums that I had heard before I heard Blue, uh, in fact. But as soon as I heard the first lines of that song, songs are like tattoos, I I was captured because they are. Songs are like tattoos, right? And my roommate was playing that album and I was like, "What is that?" I was mesmerized, and I think over the years that metaphor of songs are like tattoos has uh, showed up for me in many different ways and is as true today for me, Trevor, as when I first when I first heard it.
All right, let's hear Blue, and we will be right back with Paula Boggs.